Barbara and Hisman commenting on the book in a broad way. And then, of course, the Paula Campos Pinto, Tammy and Jeff and myself will talk about the different parts of the book. And then, of course, we hope that there will be an open discussion with authors and audience. So thank you so much for attending. I give the floor to Jeff and Tammy.
Okay, right. Thanks very much, Analia. Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, because you're in many places in the world, I think, and it's really nice to be here. I just say one extra thing about the book itself. I did a count up. There's 26 chapters, 42 authors, and 22 countries, which is quite a lot. So that's the first thing to say. And then, as Analia said, Tammy and I are going to say a little bit about Rings, which some of you know a lot about and some of you probably don't know. And Rings is an international association. It's got a very long title. I must check it. It's the International Research Association of Institutions of Advanced Gender Studies. And the conference in Lisbon was actually the fourth conference held, the fourth annual conference, and there's been another, I think, 7 since. And I mean, the idea of Rings is both rather simple and also complex at the same time. I mean, it's the idea of linking up research centers, research departments, research units in gender studies across the world. And just thinking about this, I mean, some kind of history, as always, or history behind Rings. And of course, it builds on a lot of, earlier international and transnational feminist and gender studies collaborations across the world. Quite a lot in the European context, the EU, also some networked in Africa. And in fact, from my recollection, the first idea was that I was involved in the Swedish Research Council in the sort of mid-2000s, created a competition between universities to create, in fact, 3 Swedish-based centers of excellence. And I was lucky enough to be working then in Linköping, and we made an application between Linköping and Örebro universities, like a double university application. And we were successful under what was called JEXCEL, led by my colleague and friend Nina Luque from Denmark. And in that particular application, which was successful, we had 2 sort of central aims. One was a kind of global international program of visiting scholars, professors, doctoral researchers, postdocs, to come to Sweden, in fact, over 5 or 6 years. And the second aim was to create what we rather naively put down as a European Centre of Excellence in gender studies. And we were very, very busy for the first few years with the first aim, the visiting scholars. And then after a few years, we realized we should really seriously try and create this European Centre of Excellence. And then in a meeting, we realized to define things in terms of Europe was very silly because the world isn't constructed that way. So then we realized we should try and create a kind of network of centers of excellence, research centers across the world. And we did a study, a survey of existing centers across the world, and then organized a kind of brainstorming meeting in 2012, organised from JEXCEL in Sweden and the Fay Gale Centre in Adelaide in Australia with Christine Beasley, where we had about 15 centres present, both in person and online, so not very many. And then that led to the formation of Rings formally 2 years later in a meeting in Örebro, 2014, and with a proper constitution, with a committee, with chairs and all the rest, secretaries, treasurers. And from then on, we've had annual events, annual conferences, as well as doing an update on what's going on with gender studies and feminist movements in different parts of the world, and information. And the basic idea has been to try and support each other, to support different centers, different departments, particularly around research, to promote gender studies. And in the Constitution, it says to promote advanced, critical, transformative, reflexive, feminist, critical gender studies. That's been the aim. And along with that, it's been the question of trying to actually encourage collaboration, exchange, annual conferences, often working actually interestingly across generations. I think this is very important, both established scholars and so-called emerging scholars. And we're also been working with what we put in the Constitution as an open-ended concept or notion of gender, not a sort of fixed notion of gender. And now there are 75 or about 75 member institutions. It's only institutions who belong to rings, not individuals. So these are university or similar research institutions. And again, on account, there are 32, they're in 32 countries. I was lucky enough to be chair and co-chair with Tamara Sheffer, Tammy Sheffer a number of years, and now the co-chairs are Devere Barner in KwaZulu-Natal, in Durban in South Africa, and Katrien Thiel in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And one last thing before passing over to Tammy is that there is planned another volume coming out of the 2022 conference, which in fact Tammy and Devere Barner and Giti Chandra in Iceland will be editing. But I think that's most of the things I was going to try to say in my 5 or 6 minutes, and over to you, Tammy. Is that okay?
Thanks so much,
Yeah,
Jeff.
yeah.
And also just want to take the opportunity to thank Analia and Paula and Jeff for the collegiality and the friendship in working together on this book. And thanks also for getting this first launch together. I hope we'll be having more launches in different parts of the world to keep up with our spirit of transnationality. Yes, so just to add to what Jeff said, as somebody located in a global southern context of South Africa, Rings has been particularly valuable for ensuring that the work we do in South Africa and in other global southern contexts is valued, is acknowledged, is drawn on, given ongoing and historical erasures and marginalization of southern knowledges. However, it's also been important for opening up valuable connections and collaborations across the globe, which I think this book speaks to, that extends and strengthens all of our thinkings to think together across our different contexts. Having been part of Rings since its inception, and also having been fortunate to have been part of a range of transnational feminist collaborations with some of the people in the room, often including international travel and residencies, specifically for early career scholarship. And Jeff mentioned this generational aspect of Rings. I'm hugely appreciative of the richness that such movements, mobilities, and engagements across geopolitical differences offer. But I do need to add that it continues to be a challenge to ensure more representation across the globe. And that also has to do with the challenges of geopolitical inequalities, who can travel, who is mobile, etc. I also want to finally reiterate what I think Jeff alluded to. That is the importance and productivity of solidarities across nation-state differences, which are so significant for advocacy and for a global feminist ethics of care. And we've really witnessed this materially in our work in Rings, where we continue to mobilize solidarity when there's a challenge in one particular context, like, for example, the attacks on gender studies where was it, in Hungary and in other parts of the world. And so, yeah, just to flag those aspects and to say that for all of us, it's been a very warm and nurturing space. And I hope this is also something that will extend knowledge about Rings and bring further members into the network and the organization. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff and Tammy. So we can pass now. Thank you so much for your words and your kindness and raising the issue that it has been really a network of friendship also, and that is very important all through these years, and also the collaboration of the making of the book. So I will pass now to Barbara Riesman.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm thrilled to be here at this book launch. thank you to the editors so much for asking me. I will admit, when asked to do this, the sheer length and breadth of the edited volume sort of intimidated me. I think the editor has done really an amazing job of covering much, not all, but much of the world and incorporating major theoretical debates and current challenges. What I'm going to do is just give a very brief overview of the kinds of articles in each of the 3 sections, and then end with a few comments about what I learned overall from reading the book.
Great.
I'll start with the first section of the book. That's where I'll start. The narratives of gender scholarship in different countries were so engrossing that I ended up reading them slowly and carefully, even though my full intention was to skim. But they were too interesting to skim. In the first section, you find a series of articles that highlight the remarkably creative ways that feminist scholarship and ideas have survived through both good times and dark times across the globe. I found at least 3 cross-cutting themes in the first section. The first one was institutionalization. How it happens, when it happens, and when sometimes it is destroyed. The second theme was the dynamic relationship between feminist activism and scholarship, and in both directions. And the third theme was the central importance of the reigning political regime for the health and well-being of gender scholarship and feminist ideas. So, but then there were those 3 themes, and I decided to organize my remarks about the first part of the book around institutionalization, because I needed some theme for organizing my remarks. Let me begin with those articles that highlight places where women and gender studies have yet to be very institutionalized. And in this, the articles on Albania, the Czech Republic, and Iran. And so in Albania, we learned that feminism is still the F word and seen very negatively. But that even that being the case, feminist ideas circulate in non-academic spaces and are sometimes integrated into college courses just without a lot of fanfare in ways that will not cause attention to them. There's a suggestion in this article that the demand for courses might allow for more institutionalization, as neoliberal universities are looking for paying students/customers. And so I thought that was interesting. In Iran, there is some feminist mobilization, but not certainly an institutionalization of feminist scholarship. There are women, however, who choose to work within the state to help other women, and those who work with NGOs from elsewhere. While no broad movement has really arisen, from 2022 forward, the Women Defying the Morality Police has sparked publicity and may be a beginning of a movement forward. In the Czech Republic, we learned that feminist scholarship there is more, and I love this word, of a scene than a place inside the academy. The NGOs have sort of been depoliticized in some ways and depoliticized feminist agendas. But here too, I think it's really important that feminist ideas still circulate in art, in culture, and that it's important when we think about how feminist ideas are circulating and emerging, that we think about the feminist scene that exists and transmits knowledge. The next articles I want to talk about are those where feminists have succeeded in institutionalization of gender scholarship, but then that scholarship was deinstitutionalized. And that here I want to talk about Brazil and Russia. In post-Soviet Russia, feminist scholarship was welcomed as part of the new openness, and it thrived for a while. The golden age of gender scholarship was the end of the 20th, early 21st century. But as Russia moved into authoritarianism and then totalitarianism, feminist research centers first were kind of co-opted to be anti-feminist ones, and then indeed shut altogether. I found this part particularly painful because I was part of a feminist transnational research project in the post-Soviet era, and I remember the exuberance and the feminist format of that era, and that all of those things that were built were deinstitutionalized. But the authors are very clear. Feminist ideas are not dead. Young feminists are sponsoring feminist festivals, have organized a Me Too-ish kind of movement, and feminist Russian studies has be kept alive by very courageous people inside the country and those who are now outside of the country. The same kind of article, the same kind of themes came through the article about Brazil, where we see women's studies and gender being institutionalized, and then right-wing anti-gender ideology deinstitutionalizing it. And yet here too, even after the attacks on women in gender scholarship, there has been a recent renaissance and revival of feminist ideas and theorizing without the support of the government and without institutionalization. Other articles recount those with somewhat recent or more recent success at institutionalization than the very earliest ones, and that was Portugal and Argentina. Both countries began building knowledge centers after political revolutions. But as always, feminist ideas were fomenting before as well as after institutionalization. I thought it was really interesting that a critical feminist test was published in Portugal in 1973 under the dictatorship. Still, it was after the Carnation Revolution that studies of gender became possible and eventually institutionalized. Here, too, there was a suggestion that transnational feminist research partnerships have helped with the success of institutionalization because a neoliberal university values cross-national research and sometimes cross-national grant funding. Again, the interesting irony of sometimes neoliberal institutions having positive as well as negative effects. In Argentina, the building of women and gender studies began toward the end of the 20th century, and where feminists were once mocked in universities, they are now sometimes respected and even senior members of the academy. In fact, many of the activists who have recently fought against gender violence and for abortion rights first learned about feminism in university classrooms. We see in Argentina the strong connection between feminist activism, feminist knowledge production in both directions and over generations. And then there are 3 articles about societies with very institutionalized gender scholarship: Germany, Iceland, and Uganda. In Germany, gender scholarship has its own faculty-named chairs, disciplines, degrees. That is, of course, success. And yet, the article suggested such success has not necessarily led to bringing feminist ideas infiltrating all the other disciplines in the university setting. And even in Germany now, which is actually where I am now, I'm at an Institute for Advanced Study in Germany this semester, the HWK up in Delmenhorst. Even here, feminist research is now under attack as not scientific by right-wing groups that have anti-gender ideology as part of its agenda. In Uganda, gender scholarship began to be institutionalized in 1991 as part of democratization. How it was conceived, I thought, was interesting, has progressed, as has the field, first as women in development, and of course then as moving to gender in development. And it seemed to me that gender analysis has been institutionalized in Uganda better than anywhere else I have read about in the world, where there's actually a required course on some kind of gender analysis for all university students. And yet here too, it's under attack now. Here, as courses are not directly job related, they are increasingly deemed as irrelevant by university leadership, and feminism is being named as part of being part of an apologist ideology in support of Western imperialism. The authors suggest that activism may be needed to reignite feminism within very institutionalized gender studies. And finally, we have the case of Iceland, where feminism is institutionalized within the society as well as in the academy, with degree programs since the 1970s. Here, the national foreign policy is defined as feminist, and there's a gender studies and training program called GUEST, designed to do transnational feminist policy, to address women's lack of political power across countries. Here is feminist scholarship not only being birthed by politics, but birthing new political activity. So I promise I won't go as long on about the second to third parts of the book. I'll finish up. The second part of the book focuses on theoretical debates, tensions, and controversies in feminist and gender studies, and includes some of the same concepts that we saw highlighted by individual authors in the first section, particularly the role of institutionalization of gender scholarship and the attacks on feminism and gender scholarship by right-wing anti-gender ideologists. Other themes include how young feminists are introducing more concern with post-colonialism, queer theory, intersectionality, masculinities, animal rights, and the environment, as well as focus on including the relationship between the local and transnational feminism and the contradictory effects of neoliberalism in universities on feminist thought. The final section of the book focuses on topics that remain challenging for feminists and includes more sort of empirical research findings in sections. Topics here include young women's attraction to and rejection of traditional femininities, sex work, solidarity and student social movement in South Africa, whiteness in Jordan, gender violence in Turkey, and transnational feminist activism and research. You can see the breadth and of the variety of topics. And let me begin, as I began, saying I really intended to read this book quickly, just to skim it, but I couldn't. I spent days thinking about these articles, and I have to say, I was inspired. As an American gender scholar whose research is no longer fundable under our current regime, I sense that we, Americans, are going into one of these dark periods that so many others have faced around the world in the last century and now. As we in the US seem to be moving from a functioning democracy into authoritarianism, and who knows, perhaps totalitarianism, feminist and gender scholarship, as well as critical scholarship about race and ethnicity and almost any kind of systematic inequality, is being deinstitutionalized. It is happening at this moment and may end up without any government support or funding. What I learned from these articles and from this volume is that we need to develop a feminist intellectual scene, as the Czech scholars have named it, a way to keep critical scholarship and ideas alive through dark times. I see now, from immersing myself in this volume, that it is indeed possible, and others have survived in the attempt to keep feminist theory and scholarship alive beyond the academy. And for that insight, I am very grateful to the editors and the authors, and pleased and honored to be here as part of the launch.
Sorry, I was silent. Thank you so much, Barbara, for your inspiring words also. And of course, all of us are have solidarity with you concerning the dark times that you are passing in the States, and hoping that you can have resistance and let's see what's going to happen. But we are here to stand for you. That's all, all we can say. Now I pass the floor to Ligia Amancio. Do you want to follow? Please.
Thank you, Analia.
Mhm.
And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, as Jeff already did, to everybody. I'm also very honored to be here. And I was just saying to Analia and Paula in the beginning that I thought it was a punishment in the beginning when you put this huge book in my hands. And then it's like Barbara. It was a huge pleasure to read it. And I dedicated many, many afternoons to read it in detail and not only just swiftly doing the job. So as you asked me to speak about the relevance of the book, that's what I will do after a very short introduction. Feminism and gender studies have always faced challenges throughout their history. Some challenges specific to the context of emergence and development of these fields, others more common and widespread across contexts. However, recent social and political changes add, in my view, new dimensions to these challenges. And I will now only name three: at the level of public debates, at the level of institutions, culture, and at the level of dominant values. Nowadays, public debates assume conflicting polarizations, requiring strong ideological frontiers, thus rendering this subject, the subject of controversy or debate, more visible than ever, given the weight of emotions elicited and the impact, the mediatic impact it always has. I remember in my country, some years ago, you never heard about this subject. You never read an article in a paper about this subject. It was a sort of taboo subject. But this is not true now. And this evolution also could probably apply to other countries. In higher education institutions, we have a dominant neoliberal environment that creates new organizational norms and values products before than knowledge. And finally, the accentuation of individualism has caused a lack of engagement with social inequalities that is to be seen even in societies where feminism and other struggles for equality were very strong and visible before. Yes. This book includes some of the papers presented at the 2018 and 2019 RINGS conferences. I don't need to explain what RINGS stands for. It has already been made before, in Lisbon and Tallinn, respectively. Without going into details of the book's content that will be presented later on during this session, I would like to stress that it starts with an overview of the state of the art in feminist and gender studies in 10 different countries. They were already referred to in detail by Barbara. And they are also listed in the invitation you sent before for the session. The other sections dedicated to theoretical debates and controversies in the field and challenging topics in research also give us a picture of the state of the art of feminist and gender studies in countries not included in the first section, such as South Africa, Jordan, and Turkey. It therefore, in the whole book, offers a comprehensive view of the development of feminist and gender studies across the world. One first lesson that stands out of the country's presentations refers to the commonalities across contexts that differ in location, history, and economic development. Obstacles for the development of these fields exist in all countries. Some worse, others less bad. Overall, second aspect, the field remains at the outer circle of the academic institutions. Furthermore, the more recent challenges of anti-feminism and anti-genderism that are linked to the rise of misogynistic views, the influence of religion and authoritarianism seem to be present in most geographies and contexts, and social contexts. The refusal of analysis based on the social fabric are part of the denial of science and scientific thinking, and its replacement by beliefs in natural fixes. What could have been seen some years ago as a backlash against the steady growth of knowledge in some particular contexts of gender and feminist studies has become today a real obstacle, even a denial of knowledge growth in the field. Hence, the second lesson that stands out from this book, in my opinion, is that more democracy and broader recognition of rights are the best ways of facing those obstacles in spite of the difficulties in debating or simply dialoguing about social changes and theoretical proposals coming out of feminist and gender studies fields. And for these reasons, I would signal a small frustration I had reading the book, which was the absence of public policies and protection of human rights. Because these are areas of utmost importance for democracies in the present moment, and that are presently under serious threat. However, this is not a critique. I fully understand that options have to be made, and I respect the options that were made. But I was reading the book and thinking how much this field of knowledge is linked to, has impacted in social policies, is the result of social policies like the United Nations decade about women and things like that. To conclude, I will say that by addressing present challenges while recalling many of the past, as well as putting forward theoretical debates and controversies, this book offers a body of knowledge that is relevant as a pedagogical tool and as an instrument for awareness and feminist consciousness. The diversity of academic experience it covers underlines the importance of networks and associations such as RING to promote cooperation and counter effects of the neoliberal transformation of academic institutions, as well as enhancing debate and critical thinking. In this sense, this book contributes to a better preparation of academics working in the field of feminist and gender studies to face the consequences of the present turn of populism and authoritarianism in their field of work. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ligia. we are just in time. Everybody is been very short, but very valuable contributions from Barbara, from Ligia until now. So I can pass the floor now to, thank you so much. This is so, we hope to then in the end to debate all the questions that were raised, but we still now to move on to the other parts. But I have just registered some of the things that could be for the debate afterwards, that are very interesting, as both Barbara and Ligia raised. So Paula, please, I give the floor to Paula. We are passing for the second part of the presentation of the book.
Thank you, Analia. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here today for this online book launch. After so many years working on this book, it's been really a long time. But I guess that's usual in these kinds of very complex projects. We faced many hurdles in our road here, but I think that today it feels like all those were worthwhile to face, and it's just a pleasure to have this book in our hands, and really to see the contribution that it can make to the film. Allow me also, as co-editor, to take just a minute to extend a big thank you to all the authors that contributed to the book, to our publishers, and especially also to my co-editors, colleagues. It was truly a pleasure and an honor working with you. Including here, of course, Annette von Allemann, who was we worked with in the beginning, and to whom I also pay my respects. As you all know, this book has 3 parts, and I was asked to make a detailed presentation of the contents of part 1. So this part 1, it's already been said here, is devoted to analyzing the state of the art of feminist and gender studies in countries around the globe, from Albania to Argentina, from Brazil to Iran, from the Czech Republic to Uganda, but also Germany, Iceland, Portugal, and Russia. The various chapters in this part describe the progresses made in feminist scholarship and activism, but also the challenges and resistance faced and the strategies used to deal with them. The first chapter, by Adriana Pichitelli and Yara Belali, offer an overview of feminist and gender studies in Brazil, a country with a long history of feminist activism and feminist studies programs who have been consolidated in the country at least since the 1980s. But the authors write under very different times, under the dark times of the Bolsonaro era. And so they analyze the factors that contribute to the expansion of the feminist fields, even during and under those very dark times. In spite of the very strong conservative anti-rights and gender ideology rhetoric that was growing in the country at the time, they argue that they could see also a rise of new feminist voices that often use the internet as a channel for their claims. They also saw a decolonial turn in the scholar work and the broadening of the theoretical framework that contributed to what they called an effervescence in feminist and gender scholarship that ultimately shows a very powerful form of resistance, a feminist resistance. Chapter 2 takes us to Argentina, where Monica Tarducci draws from her own experience as a feminist activist and scholar to analyze the development of gender studies in this Latin American country that lived under a military dictatorship up until the 1980s, focusing primarily on 2 key historical feminist struggles: the mass struggle against violence against women and the efforts to legalize abortion. The chapter highlights the different forms of entanglements of activism and scholarship that were so essential for the flourishing of gender studies in Argentina. The following chapter travels across the Atlantic Ocean, landing in Portugal. Anália Torres, myself, and Rosemary Dean discuss in this paper also the late start of feminist and gender studies and its institutionalization as a scientific field in Portugal. Portugal lived also under a dictatorship until from 1926 to 74. And it was a very conservative, right-wing and oppressive political regime with very strong ties to the Catholic Church. And we also experienced a colonial war for 13 years, from 61 to 74. And this made feminist agendas very difficult to establish in the country. And even after the revolution, the Carnation Revolution, the topics of women's movements and feminists were still seen as ideological and difficult to enter and be respected in academia. So only after the turn of the new century, feminist scholarship really gained visibility and attention, and the launch of CIEG, the center that is hosting this book launch today, was very important in this successful process. But as in other countries, we are also facing here attacks on gender studies and on gender equality issues, and nowadays even more than when we wrote the chapter, because we're seeing also the rise of a far-right party. And the threats to the sustainability of the field, either by lack of funding or political opposition, require from all of us a constant vigilance and strategic planning and action. In chapter 4, our late colleague Annette von Allemand applies the concept of institutionalization to a sociological analysis of the academic development of gender studies in Germany and German-speaking countries, from its beginning in the 1970s until today. She identifies the controversies around the institutionalization of gender studies in Germany, which are seen by some as a success story, by others not so successful, even problematic. But she argues that gender studies is really become institutionalized, although it's also under anti-genderist attacks more recently. The next 3 chapters address the state of the art of gender studies in Eastern European countries. The paper by Blanka Nilova and Eva Smidova draws from the concept that Barbara also discussed here, the Czech feminist scene, to conceptualize the workings of feminist activities in this country in its diversity of activities, actors, and theoretical backgrounds. Feminist activism and scholarship also only became possible in this country after the change of the political regime in 1989 and the massification of higher education within a liberal, neoliberal context. And as a result, they see this varied and continuously changing landscape of feminist activities and actors emerge, but they see in that also a hope for the future of the feminist project. In chapter 6, Olga Shnirova examines the gender studies part in Russia, also from their emergence in 1990s to the current times. It all started when the country also experienced the establishment of democratic institutions, but by 2008 there was a reverse in this situation, as we all know, and therefore this became all connected with the political confrontation with the West that Russia started then. But as Olga says and writes, the patient is still alive, so it's not dead, and is resisting through new alliances between independent researchers, feminist grassroots activists, and through the social media networks as well. Finally, Elmira Danai and Edwin Lame in chapter 7 focus on gender and feminist studies in higher education institutions in Albania, and they analyze the barriers to the establishment of the field in a country where feminism is either considered imported from the West or associated with communism, and therefore is poorly understood in society in general. And the authors argue for more theoretical debate around gender, feminism, and intersectionality, but they also are hopeful because they see new forms of bottom-up activism creating new spaces for these debates and scholarship. From Europe, we move to Africa. Following Josephine Haikire, Amon Mwini, and Peace Musimento's analysis of the history of activism for gender equality in Uganda. They trace this history from the conceptual and theoretical footprints of the early gender development and human rights approach to a more recent focus on intersectionality, critical studies of men and masculinities. And they realize that the discipline is increasingly becoming established. Nevertheless, they note that the gender studies and theoretical discourse around feminism continue to elicit resistance, especially from the state, requiring deliberate and concerted theoretical and practical efforts to counter the backlash. The following chapter is located in Asia, and it's written by Nazanin Sharokny, and she discusses approaches to feminist politics and women's quest for gender equality in post-revolutionary Iran through the actions and activisms of women's movements. The chapter provides a very rich analysis of these movements and the dilemmas they have faced and addressed, understood from an historical perspective. And finally, this first part of the book closes with a chapter authored by Irma Erling-Doster. The chapter offers an overview, as have been already said here, of a program, JEST, which is an extraordinary example of a transnational feminist pedagogical intervention being informed by the framework and this country's policy on development, gender equality, and women's empowerment. And it's a program that has involved people from all countries in the world as well. So in short, we can say that this part one, as it has been already highlighted here this afternoon, offers a rich, in-depth understanding of the dynamics of gender studies over the last decades in many different parts of the world. Despite the diversity of the countries analyzed, as Barbara has also noted, there are a few cross-cutting patterns that emerge. And we agree very much in this comment. We see a pattern concerning an increasing institutionalization of gender studies across the world, though at different paces and degrees, in accordance to the local context, and with the countries that experienced dictatorships in the 20th century, such as Portugal, Argentina, Russia, Albania, the Czech Republic, presenting a later development. Scientific developments in this field often happening closely linked to feminist movements, and the cases of Argentina, even Germany and Uganda seem clear about this, and others carried out in the face of state resistance and attacks, as in Russia or Iran or Albania. Another trend is the resurgence of attacks on gender studies as a field and on gender activities, also with a variety of forms. Although we think that this backlash can be actually interpreted as a reaction to the progress that the field has made, both in scholarship as in activism. And finally, what seems a very hopeful feature for the future, a strong presence of young women and students addressing new agendas, queer perspectives, Black feminisms, decolonial studies, non-binary and intersectional approaches. And this new trend that does not displace the old issues that have been so important to the field, like rights to abortion or combating violence against women, continued to bring vitality to this field. So I just hope that this brief presentation will encourage you to read further, to discover the richness of the contributions contained not just in this part one, but indeed in the whole book. Unfortunately, I will have to leave soon because I have to attend another meeting here at ISCSP. So I won't be able to participate in the debate, but thank you very much for all of you who attended, and thank you very much for continue keeping this field alive. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paula. And we know already that you have to go, but your contribution was very positive, very enrichment for the book and for all of us now. So I give the floor to Tammy and to Jeff. Which you wants to begin?
I'll start. Thanks, Anali, and thanks, Paula, for that overview. I also wanted to thank Barbara and Najia for those really wonderful comments and synthesis of the book. I really valued your inputs. So the second section of the handbook really moves away from particular nation-state contexts, which is very much showcased in the first part, to elaborate on current innovative theoretical developments and also ongoing and new debates, tensions, and controversies within contemporary gender studies and feminist thinking and praxis more broadly. In these 8 chapters, including authors from Australia, Chile, Denmark, the Netherlands, Portugal, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK, they introduce and engage with a range of theoretical contributions, both in more established areas in feminist scholarship, but also in emerging and growing areas, including post-humanist, new materialist feminisms, indigenous feminisms, also queer theory and contestations around identity politics and trans-political thinking and claims, the contributions of Black feminisms, the impact of decolonial struggles and decolonial feminisms, the politics of collaboration and interdisciplinarity, the productive relationship of gender studies with art and activism also emerged strongly in this section, as well as the place of critical studies of men and masculinities in gender studies. And finally, some attention is also given to the current intensifying right-wing backlashes and political trends on gender ideology that has already come through as quite a strong theme and is increasingly intensified in current contexts. So just to say a little bit more about the individual chapters in relation to these thematics, and I must say it feels a bit odd to represent the authors, some of whom are in the room. It would be so wonderful to have everybody's voices here, but perhaps there's a way of organizing further launches where we can do a bit of that. But the first 3 chapters, and in this respect, I'm very grateful also to the series editors who of the initial series that was going to publish this, then it became a handbook, who mentioned and insisted that we attempt to include a number of chapters that they felt needed to be there in order to have a more representative perspective on current developments in feminist scholarship, as well as some older ones. So I want to just flag that gratitude. And the first 3 chapters specifically take up a number of relatively new, but also strengthening bodies of feminist work. So in the first chapter in this section, Nina Licke overviews cutting-edge developments related to what she terms more than human feminisms, but is also post-humanism, new materialisms, decolonial indigenous feminisms, which foreground the critique of human exceptionalism, the hierarchical divide and binary between humans and animals, plants, minerals, and so on, and an interrogation of what has historically come to count as human, as Sylvia Winter puts it, that is white, cisgender, male, northern, heteronormative, and so on. And this chapter really maps out major strands of thinking in this area and includes many illustrative works, particularly a number of fruitful engagements of art, activism, and scholarship to flag key contributions of this growing body of gender scholarship, which really brings together gender and social justice with planetary justice, which I think has become so imperative with us in current environmental crises that are so powerfully linked to social and gender injustices. And then there's the chapter on queer theory by Louise Morley and Daniel Layton, which provides a really comprehensive picture of the complex but also generative relationship between queer theory and feminist scholarship in the academy in particular. Introducing queer theory as an analytical tool that offers a different way of thinking and signifying transgression, in their words, they discuss the ongoing convergences, but also the tensions and challenges that surface in the relationship of queer and feminist theory. And these authors argue for the imperative to overcome divisions. Actually, this is quite a strong theme throughout the book, and particularly in this section. And they mobilize and they argue for the mobilization of what they term the sharp queer gaze to provide more critical and constructive perspectives of ongoing power relations that permeate and constitute universities globally. The next chapter is by Pedro Vasconcelos and Sofia Aboim, who examined the political dynamics of trans rights recognition worldwide to assess its effects on contemporary gender orders and trans and gender justice. As the authors argue, the recent global self-determination turn is still fraught with paradoxes and tensions that have emerged in the form of regional disparities in support for trans rights, prevailing and recalcifying binary gender markers, and persistent gaps between legal recognition and the material realization of rights, something that I think we all recognize in different ways across gender and sexual justice and rights. The chapter by Anne Orman focuses on gender studies as an interdisciplinary field of knowledge. Although special attention is given in this chapter to the Swedish experience, it of course speaks to global trends towards increasing dialogue beyond the humanities and the social sciences, where I suppose gender studies has tended to dominate, or it has dominated in gender studies, notably from health sciences, medicine, and the natural and technical sciences. The author argues the productivity and necessity of such interdisciplinary research in gender studies, but also flags the challenges and the imperative to be open to dealing with complexities, hybridities, and methodological and theoretical pluralism, which is not always an easy project. And then we have Rosemary Berkema's chapter, which thinks with feminist art, making a poignant argument for the possibilities of critical feminist aesthetic dialogues. Rosemary's chapter presents a number of art installations from the diverse contexts of Nigeria, Southern Africa, also Europe, and including 2 projects from MUT, the Museum of Equality and Difference, which is an online collective of critical scholars and activists that work with art for justice. Applying a methodology developed in her monograph, Revolting Critique, Berkema argues for the rich potential of artistic practices in developing alternative imaginaries for gender and social justice, as also entangled with planetary survival and flourishing. Then we have the chapter on critical studies on men and masculinity, CSMM. Here, Jeff Hearn and Richard Howson examine the body of work of CSMM, identifying 3 major and enduring debates. Firstly, tensions between naming and deconstruction. Secondly, the centrality of power, domination, and hegemony. And finally, more specifically, risk-taking and socially problematic practices. The chapter also importantly, which has been alluded to in previous speakers, addresses the institutionalization of CSMM, raising some of the current divergences and contestations in this body of work, with emphasis on geopolitics, the differing positioning of practitioners, and the shifting focus of research. And I'm sure Jeff will add when he comes on in a minute. The final chapter in this section, authored by Annika Tim, Andrea Mayhofer and Matthias Lutterbach, reflects on how feminist researchers can best respond to the challenging situation of attacks of recent years on gender studies and feminism from various populist right-wing religious and other sources. A very important chapter, considering we will most likely be seeing a proliferation of such attacks. These authors argue for the importance of understanding such anti-genderist critiques and moving beyond being defensive and polarizing to more active engagements. The authors specifically make a plea, in their words, for holding on to the emancipatory aspiration for mutual understanding, despite all the difficulties and the possible futility, and to try to contribute to a dialogue as much as possible. And now I hand over to Jeff to say a few words about my own chapter with Cisa and Gavaza and any other thoughts about this session. Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Temi. I'll be pretty quick. Yeah, just to comment on the missing chapter, which is by Tamara Scheffer and Cisa Mbaza, which is on South Africa, in Southern Africa, and just a few key points, at least from my reading, which you may disagree with. I mean, one is about, perhaps again saying the obvious, the unavoidability of looking at location and history in apartheid, anti-apartheid, or so-called post-apartheid. I mean, one cannot avoid, in a sense, that question of context, which of course applies to all locations in the world, but in a sense it's so obvious in terms of the impact of anti-apartheid struggle and geopolitical location. And a very interesting aspect of this is the shift from what had been relatively privileged researchers doing research, so to speak, on or upon marginalized communities, particularly Black communities, a shift from that to forms of research that are more, if you like, within, including moves to post-colonial and decolonial and other kinds of critical positioning. And particularly, I think, very important, both across the country and also in Cape Town, Western Cape, where Tami is based, is the impact of various student protests, the so-called fallist movements, the roads must fall, the fees must fall, and other kinds of linked movements, which cannot be then sort of separated from what's going on within gender studies in terms of content and responses, and also processes as well, political processes. So this means that feminist, queer, intersectional, and also something we haven't perhaps commented on very much so far, digital politics and digital, if you like, digital feminist and gender studies is integral to these processes. And the attempt to therefore create a whole variety of more creative, more different, more interventionist methods and of actually doing research across issues of care, embodiment, affect, relationality, and so on. So that's just my sort of take on the chapter, but Tami might have some different things you want to emphasize. Okay, is that all right? I pass you back to Analia and then yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for Tamara, Jeff, and of course also to Paula. Well, this is my turn now to say some words concerning the third chapter, the third part of the book. So it has we called it challenging topics on gender research, reflections, dilemmas, and plurality of views. Of course, this is a more difficult, this is more diverse in terms of what we have been seeing now. It has 7 chapters, as I was saying. We had the first chapter, and just connecting with what has been said in chapter of Tamara and the other colleague, we have Divya Bana from that's talking about femininity, violence, and the construction of girly girl and raw girl. This is the 19th chapter, and Divya engages with a challenging transnational issue for feminist scholars, that of the persistence of the problematic girl as victim, trope that pervades much scholarship on African and other global Southern young people's sexualities and genders. Drawing on qualitative data from studies with 12 or 13-year-old Black working class girls in South Africa contexts, Bana identifies two narratives deployed by participants, that of girly girls and raw girls, through which they negotiate their identities and challenge dominant gender prescriptions. The chapter calls for the imperative to challenge deterministic and constraining ideas and for greater acknowledgements of the nuanced and complex ways in which young girls both embrace and resist gender norms. The chapter 20, which is by Anne-Charlotte Karlstig and Christina Linden, is located in the Swedish context, and of course, as already Jeff and Tamara has told, we're talking about. Of course, some of the authors of the chapters are here, so they are completely free to talk about that chapter and to question some of the things that we are just so quickly synthesizing. So I was saying that's located in Swedish context with a particular focus on the implementation of gender mainstreaming in organizational contexts. Drawing on two case studies of how civil servants implement gender mainstreaming, they argue that theoretical and ideological tensions within feminist theory and practice are surfaced in the day-to-day practices of gender mainstreaming, and that dealing with them will lead to better understanding and therefore to practice. The chapter's central argument is that while dilemmas and tensions can be problematic if ignored, they may be productive if deployed as a starting point for discussions, thus strengthening such gender justice initiatives. Karen Gabriel from India is talking. The chapter is talking about the precarious worlds of pornography. The chapter starts with a discussion concerning precarity and precarious labor, and then addresses the specificities of film pornography as a form of sex work. Karen Gabriel contributes to studies of the broad and global question of precarity via focused attention to the sexual acts that are captured on camera, and in the course of producing what is circulated as pornography material. Gabriel's work takes issue with discussions of both precarity and pornography that are often framed within global north locations and assumptions by focusing on the precarious work done in relation to the production of pornography and specific types of sexuality explicit material circulated as pornography in the Indian context. Moreover, the digitization of porn and porn work has made them much more precarious. Then we go to again to South Africa, and Amanda goes in chapter 22 with a title, very suggestive title, saying being a Trojan horse, rethinking solidarity in student politics of the fallist movement in South Africa, as already has been talked about. We have been talking about this movement already. So Amanda engages the concept of affective solidarities to critically reflect on contemporary decolonial feminist politics in South Africa, tracing some of the recent contexts of student activism. Argues that these movements, particularly the resistance of women and queer students, have changed the trajectory of higher education in South Africa. Assessing key points of mobilization with particular focus on the development of vocabulary of pain, she argues that the project might have been more effective if students had more reflexively engaged the affective dimensions of solidarity. The chapter suggests that in this respect, an opportunity for greater solidarity was not fully realized in this project of justice across diversities of race, gender, and other lines of difference. Chapter 23 with Amira Fretz and Eva Maidens, called Racializing All Ajnabiyya on Whiteness and Conversion in Jordan. examines the intersections of religion, ethnicity, and racialization, an area of scholarship that is still relatively neglected within gender studies. The study is grounded on in-depth interviews conducted with white women converts to Islam, living and having raised their children in Jordan. By studying whiteness in relation to the racialization of religion through the lenses of conversion and kinship, the chapter complicates the racialization of Islam and of convert women by basing the location of analysis to Jordan. On chapter 24, Pilar Milagros from Turkey, examining changes in gender-based violence prevention policies, critical discourse analysis in the Turkish political context. Milagros draws from feminist critical discourse analysis and corpus linguistics to examine political discourses on gender-based violence prevention in Turkey from the late 90s to 2018. An analysis showed the changes in policies and the ways in which, through these documents, the government enacts cultural violence by portraying women in negative and stereotypical ways while ignoring women from other genders and sexualities. Drawing from these results, Milagros argues for the urgent need of feminist and gender scholarship that investigates political discourses to expose the ways in which governments and their laws and policies perpetrate cultural violence while helping to preserve what has been accomplished by feminist struggles in Turkey in the past. Finally, chapter 25 by Ernst Scheffer and Gam addresses the story of RING's International Research Association of Institutes of Advanced Gender Studies, arguing that feminism and gender studies have always been, are, and need to be transnational. The authors take stock of the development of the association as a case study in transnational feminist organization. Finally, I would like just to finish to say that all these chapters in part 3 cover old and new research issues in feminist and gender studies. We can talk about construction of femininity, precarity, racialized and gender histories, gender and national identity. So research questions that address the topics of, that we might say also intersectionality. But also at the same time, questions regarding methods, research methods, and gender equality mainstreaming and the tensions that can arise, more classical themes like gender-based violence. So we have a very diverse, covering, I think, a lot of great topics, and not only in this chapter, in your book. And I think now we should try to hear authors and other colleagues that want to raise issues and to debate. I think there were some topics of debate already talked about that we can draw from here. But I think now it's time to listen to this marvelous attendance. We have now 42. We had already 46 people in this launching, but we have, of course, the authors and among them much other colleagues that want to talk about. So I just open the floor. Who wants to make the first move? And thanking again very much to my great good co-editors and also the authors and the presenters. Thank you so much, Ligia and I think and Barbara for all the ways they made the synthesis, and they were common grounds on the topics that we can discuss on. But I would like really to give the floor to some of you in the attendance. So no one wants to say something. This is really interesting. If you see, there are a lot of different topics, and I think, of course, it's not everything. It's not covered up. So I remember, for instance, that the book has people from every party in the world, but it has not. It has nothing. No one from the United States, for instance. I don't know. It happened like that. And of course, there are some realities that we don't cover, of course. And but we might say in the beginning that we have a kind of dominance of European colleagues, but then in the end, it did not end like that. So, and concerning topics, I think that it's very, very, very interesting how at the same time we have gender. Well, I'm speaking because I'm hoping that someone starts also to say something. And especially I would like to hear the authors. But anyway, one of the things that I think it's might challenging in the book when we see the old chapters is that at the same time it's very updated, so we are just talking about and at the same time it has a lot of research work of research done in the countries. It has not only the part of and the history of his feminisms and gender studies in several countries, theoretical debates, new questions, and new topics, as well as the old topics begins. So the advances and all the backlash. And then, of course, the diversity of research topics that open for the future, things that we know that we might, it's very important to have more research on those topics and more information and more going to the ground. So I think that's a kind of combination of things that are very rich. But now I would like to hear some of you. So I think I had Sarah?
Yes,
Sarah
thank you.
Merlini, you want to?
Okay, thank you. I just have I don't know, a simple question, but perhaps a question that it's not easy to answer. First of all, I would like to thank this opportunity to hear more about the book that I didn't read yet. So I still need to catch up with all of those incredible essays and articles and chapters that you talked about. But I really, the question that I have is more what is needed for gender studies and feminist studies being valued as knowledge. So I don't know, this is maybe a simple question, but we are living in a very strange era where anti-facts and anti-science movements are growing and all of that. So what do we need to do to give the value, the real value, or to show the relevance of gender studies and feminist studies? I don't know. That's my question for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Any colleagues want to answer, Sarah? I'm seeing Eva. Hello, Eva. How are you? So I'm talking directly to the colleagues of the book while someone is trying to answer Sarah. I'm seeing also Nina Lika. I'm seeing Joseph Akire. I'm talking about the so anyone wants yeah?
This is Josephine.
Oh, Josephine, how are you, Josephine?
Fine, how are you?
Yeah.
I've been on the road, so I've not been very active listening, but I got part of what, and the question by Sarah
Can
on
you
what we
want
need to do for gender studies to be regarded as knowledge. I think that, first of all, we have to acknowledge that there's clearly backlash that there was progress and there is backlash. So the backlash is an onslaught to the apparent, whether symbolic or real, progress. And that means that whatever we do, we even have to do better, especially in terms of theory building. For us, I think from the African feminist side, we think that the backlash will not be fought by complaining or what, but by theory building and by being able to create that knowledge that is able to surmount the backlash. So in a sense, we say that at some point we fell into something called the gender industry, where everything is packed in one thing and you never know which is which. And this is the time to actually now make it a categorical theory building exercise, a theory building venture that will be able to surmount the backlash. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josephine. No one wants to pick up from here. Ligia, please.
Well, I was just thinking that we might find interesting to strengthen the dialogue with biologists, because biology nowadays has a lot of evidence and knowledge accumulated showing the diversity, the instability of biological sexes that the mainstream right-wing discourse adores. It's always nature. But biologists can explain that nature is much more complex than they think. And I just had an experience recently with a biologist of the Portuguese community who studied in South Africa and the United States, and we did a session together just to explain this concept, right-wing concept of gender ideology. And he was listing the number of articles that exist recently from the side of biology showing that there's no sure basis of the argument of nature. So it's I think we have not the gender researchers, I mean, we have not exploited too much this aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're right. And one of the things that's really interesting is working with the health, because it's not also, when you're talking about the states, for instance, we know that it's not only gender that is at stake, it's science itself. So it's the other perspective. So, I mean, it's really important. That's one of the things also, but we might think of others. So we have Peace, Musimenta, colleague.
Thank you very much
for
this opportunity. I'm sorry my video won't work, but I would like to add my voice onto what Josephine has raised. Strengthening, how do we make the gender studies and feminist scholarship make it acceptable and respected as an academic area? I think we need to strengthen the curriculum and research so that we ensure that gender studies is integrated and integrated into interdisciplinary programs, for example, in sociology, in history, in law, in business, and we'll also encourage data-driven and empirical research that demonstrates the importance of gender studies in understanding social dynamics, because sometimes people tend to look at gender studies and as something that you add on. But if you demonstrate that it is important in explaining the different dynamics, and I think it will be appreciated. But there has also been this gender studies fatigue, where everyone who attends one lecture in gender studies takes themselves as experts. So we have to support open access publications, which make research widely available on gender studies, but also particularly on the importance of having gender studies as an academic area, and really making it intentional, because there is a tendency to lag behind and we think we have arrived and therefore we have studied enough of gender. So that kind of thing cannot work unless we have this evidence-based to show that gender studies is an academic area, and also feminism. Although, as you had already explained, there are a lot of backlash and challenges when we talk about feminism in academia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peace. Thank you so much. Now, Nina Like, very nice to see you.
First of all, thank you so much for the book and for all the wonderful presentations. I also wanted to somehow respond a bit to Sarah's the very challenging question. And well, I'm retired, so therefore I can speak from outside of academia. I'm very happy about that. Meaning, of course, I am still in academia, but in another position. And I have actually, I think that one of them, in terms of strategies, I think it was Barbara or was it Lydia who was talking about or I think it was Barbara talking about networking and support from below in dark times. And I think in a way to support each other from below, in a way from these international networks, global networks, etc., expanding them, etc., and supporting each other in actually acknowledging that, of course, this is an established and very important and I mean very respectful or respect requiring academic field. However, it's also such a controversial field, so therefore I doubt that we will be somehow recognized until the world is different from now. And I think it's also important in a way to at least in my view, to acknowledge that we have become enormously strong because all the anti-gender, the gender ideology from the right wing, etc. I mean, Trump mentioning the two genders in his inaugural speech, etc., etc. All that is, I mean, in a very twisted way, a signal of how strong we are, because actually it wouldn't have been mentioned either. And all the, I mean, Orban wouldn't have closed down gender studies in Hungary, etc., 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 had it not been because it has become a very, very, very strong and very both academically and activist field. So I think that somehow acknowledge that within these networks and support each other in dark times to believe in ourselves. But in a way, I don't think we will be respected very much out there until the world is different. So therefore, I do think it's just to try to make the world different.
Thank you so much, Nina. Now we have Tamara. Tammy, do you want to?
Thanks, and I actually just wanted to add on to Nina's point about working, connection, relationalities, care, working together, solidarities. And I think part of that is to continue being also very vigilant about how we work and about how we continue to reproduce inequalities that shape our work. And what I mean by that is that we continue in a way. It's so, I mentioned this in talking about rings, how difficult it is to get scholars, feminist scholars from global Southern contexts because of the inequalities, and how even in our work, recently I did a literature review for an EU project, and it was just astounding how few African studies came up. We had to go and target looking for African studies. So our very engines, our search engines, are biased. They set up to kind of center particular knowledges and to marginalize others. And having said that, I'm so happy to also have seen Josephine here and Peace here, and to also to acknowledge that they come from the University of Makerere, from Gender Studies, which is the biggest gender studies program on the continent of Africa. And yet, so often we hear about, spaces in the global north, in kind of the west and the north. And so I think keeping those knowledges alive and centering, being vigilant and being aware is something we need to continue. We've always been aware of this as critical feminist scholars, but inadvertently, sometimes consciously reproduce some of the very logics that we're trying to challenge. So just to kind of flag that as an important part of that going forward.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Now we have Cristina from Brazil.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this important meeting. It's a pleasure to be here, learning from everybody. I'm so sad to heard about the news from Brazil. It's true that in the time of Bolsonaro government, it was a backlash movement so hard. And now you're trying to recover all the space that we lost in the last government. Now I'm part of the PhD doctorate in gender studies in Lisbon with Anália Torres. Anália Torres is my mentor, my doctoral advisor. And now I take part of a group in Brazil that studies some gender issues, and now you study obstetrics violence against women. I'd like to know if somebody here can tell me about some studies about these issues, because it's very important for us in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cristina. Now we have Barbara. Do you want to?
I was responding. I don't have anything to answer the question that was just asked. What I did just want to say was, on a pragmatic note, one thing I noticed reading the articles is that if we take advantage of the systems we're in, even if they're not systems we endorse, we can, at least as a stopgap measure, keep going. And that, I think, is that neoliberal universities really do value transnational research, measurement of productivity, international attempts at grant funding, those kinds of things. They may not be, they actually may not be the feminist ideals of what we want to be doing in knowledge production, but if they help us build, we should take advantages of the figuring out what gets valued in the systems we're in, and as long as we can do it without in ethical ways, take advantage of the system we're in. If our universities value transnational research, make sure we do it both because we think it's really important, but also in ways that gets counted. So I just wanted to be pragmatic for a moment. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And now it's me talking. I was just that idea that you said that you can, even the neoliberal trend could be profited, because really what happens is that why did some colleagues in Portugal have been co-opted by find that the universities thinking that they were interesting because there was they were publishing internationally, and then it seemed like if that was good for universities, but that meant money and all those things about the research network and things like that. It's just so it's bizarre because we can use the weapons of capitalism just to strengthen the field and to try to that question about transnational research and network still is really helping the way we are doing research and doing, of course, our work. Anyway, I would like to say that as Nina raised, the question is really that they react against our advancements. So this is the back. The thing is that taking Portugal as an example, the Catholic Church has lost a lot of battles that we have won. We have won abortion. We have won a lot of other battles in terms of equality. And what they hate the most is that then we have policies imposing from public policies certain things that they didn't like in schools and so on. So now they are reaction again because they have the context now is favorable for the ones that were already losing. They lost and now they want to come back again. That's one of the things we have to say. So as you were saying, in the certain sense, this is a reaction against things that we have acquired with fight and with the change in policies and with, of course, with the rise of a lot of women that were more educated and that arise to certain parts of politics, even in politics or even in civil servant positions that could make some change. So I think this is a kind of, and also it happens in the States. I remember when Barbara was here making a conference and talking about what they change in census and the census in the States. That's what, of course, they don't want now. They want to throw it out. But it means that it was there before. So that's one of the things that we have to account for. That, as you said, Nina, we were powerful. And in certain, so this is the kind of a fight that is a long. We can think about our grandmothers fighting for the right to vote, but it's true. We make some advances, and then the forces and the context is not favorable now. But well, we are here still. Anyway, that's one of the things that. Being retired, I think it doesn't matter at all for the subject. Anyway, so I think, well, Jeff wrote, I don't know if you want to draw a little bit on this, on the chat, that talking about what Ligia said about the importance, the relevance of and probably people don't know exactly. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jeff? What you write in the chat, because sometimes people don't see the.
I just expressed agreement that I think there's a lot more still to be done in, you could say, in between humanities and social science in relation to the whole fields of knowledge. Whether it's biology, whether it's physics, whether it's technology. I mean, there is a lot going on in that respect. But I mean, I suppose. Just standing back a bit, looking at the handbook, I think we could have actually included more about that aspect, actually. I said so-called natural science in the broad sense. I think it's obviously very, very important, not least in terms of, where the funding goes. When you look at research funding, I can't give a figure offhand, but, a very large amount goes into those fields, So that's all. So I just wanted to reiterate. And I think that is something that has to be taken up more in the future, really. And of course, many of those fields, well, they vary, of course. They vary in terms of how they are organized and their sort of gender power structures. They're not uniform. But I just wanted to make that point. We could have had 2 or 3 or 4 more chapters looking at different disciplinary areas beyond humanities and social science.
Yeah. No, I think really that's why I think this is very important. And what you're saying about where the funds going now probably in certain countries they are not going even for science. But anyway, I think this link between, we organized something here in Portugal concerning health, trying to mix. It's difficult because the field is also it's difficult, but I think it's a battle that it's worth trying to take, because also there are people in the field that are interested in having a different kind of approach to things. Anyway, we had done Charlotte Karlstig that is people have to leave, of course, some of them. But I want to know if there's someone still wanting to have better gum. We have a lot of colleagues from that were in the book. So, Teresa.
Sorry, I can't find the little hand for some reason. First of all, I'm sorry I'm late. I just need the timetable. But first of all, congratulations on the book, of course. And I would just like to say 3 or 4 things about what I've been listening to, particularly about what Ligio and then other colleagues were mentioning in this idea of collaborating with so-called natural sciences, assuming that natural sciences are still natural sciences or are still hard sciences, which is of course a problem. First of all, I've just remembered that before Mr. Trump started saying the nice things he says, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak actually declared in one of his speeches that from then on, we only had women and men in the UK and so on and so forth. But of course, people didn't pay that much attention because it doesn't have the same amount of weapons as Mr. Trump has. I suppose that's part of the story anyway. But I was just thinking that probably the history of sociology and its recognition as a science might inspire the problem of gender studies being recognized as a science on the one hand, or by psychology or social psychology. I'm sure that in those procedures of recognition, you might, or we might find inspiration. I am a lawyer anyway, so I'm outside in more ways than one. But it just occurred to me that although it may be very interesting and probably productive to see what people are doing in neuroscience, in brain scanning, and so on and so forth, and we do have great researchers in Portugal doing that, I couldn't help thinking that things like racism and imperialism have been supported by science. So this idea that we can actually trust science in a sort of general sort of way, I think that it's not that we shouldn't look at that, what they are doing in those so-called sciences, let's use the word, but maybe we should be careful and not forget what we have learned so far anyway. And finally, I think that there may be, because of something that another colleague mentioned, there may also be a problem, not just of geography, somebody referred to to African studies and so on, but also problem of language, because when you leave the English language, you probably find or leave out quite a lot of studies and conferences and so on, where some people still resist the idea of having everything in English. And I can think of some colleagues that are doing very nice gender studies and conferences in Spain, and they just say Portuguese, Spanish, and French, please, no English. So there is also, I think, that possible divide that may be causing some degree of harm to our studies and it's their recognition. That's it for the moment, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you so much for advice, for remembering of the awful things that science, law, and a lot of things have done. Anyway, I think we can also be vigilant to these kind of things, and I think it's good to approach different areas and to approach with a different in the idea of trying to make some mainstreaming and to try not mainstreaming, at least do research together and we can learn from there. Anyway, so I think that someone wants to take up on these interesting topics of discussion? Sarah, do you think that your question was answered?
Yeah, I believe I have some highlights, but it was a tough one, so I was not expecting so many answers. So thank you so much for trying. Yes.
Okay. So, Tammy, Jeff, Ligia, Barbara, do you want to still to? Well, I think if you don't want, I think we have to thank so much for attending, for your inputs, for the authors of the chapters, for the attendants that were just there are here, a lot of students from that we can think that some of the things, that topics that we have been addressing, that we can discuss them further on classes and on research groups. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, and and I hope that you can get the book and try to read something of the precious things that were here offered. Thank you so much for everybody. Thank you so much. So stay well. Bye bye, everybody. Thank you for attending.